back into the channel. The year is 2025, and your one-star school just managed to pick up 34 top-end recruits, 3 stars and 4 stars, and even potentially 5 stars. The question is this what you want to do with your team, and how do you do it? Well, in today's video, we're going to cover recruiting in college football 25. We're going to detail my take on it. There are some slight nuances that I want you guys to be aware of in order to be able to execute a awesome class like this, and even potentially better. I mean, this isn't even hitting the cap of what you're capable of. So we're going to detail that, and we're going to talk about some of the differences between the techniques that I would recommend you utilize in comparison to the techniques that others are recommending that you utilize, and some of the benefits on both ends of that. Again, this is year 2 in a fresh Buffalo Dynasty. Year 1, we were able to come away with somewhere in the mid-20s on recruits. Again, all 4 and 3 stars. This is year 2. And obviously that's going to be the case as you continue to progress your coach and be able to do more with your recruiting board. But within 2 years, being able to get a recruiting class like this with a 1-star school is absolutely insanity. And you need to know how to be able to do this, because even if you don't want to get 34 or 35 recruits in one season, which can pose problems for teams that have a pretty full roster, you're going to want to be able to get a solid number of really good prospects. And for a lot of 1-star schools, getting a loaded class that covers positions across the board like this is actually really valuable. I know a lot of people, and this would be one of the main differences between my technique and other people's technique, would suggest that you try to get, 15 or so, maybe 20 top-end recruits. That's not a bad strategy, but you're still leaving yourself without a lot of depth on a 1-star school like that. Even with a recruiting class like this, 2 years in a row on Buffalo, we are still struggling with a little bit of depth at certain areas. And that's why it's important that you are able to get a volume of really solid prospects. So let's talk about exactly what you need in order to come away with an awesome recruiting class just like this. The very first thing that you need to make sure you're doing with your coach in being able to recruit successfully is getting to your coach abilities and selecting the right base to start with. You're going to want to start out with the recruiter base. That is key in being able to have good recruiting classes regardless of what team you are. And it's actually kind of shocking to me that a lot of the videos and suggestions out there don't immediately state this as the first thing you should do. This is absolutely the first thing you should consider and that you should plan around. You're going to earn extra XP for signing recruits, which is awesome because that means your XP is going to stack and you'll be able to continue to build up your recruiting capabilities. But what you really want to do is get to tier 2 on most of these positions within the recruiting categories. So as an example with offensive line, I'm going to quickly rush to tier 2 O-line so that I can get additional bonus to my O-line with my recruiting actions. You're going to gain extra influence on your prospects by getting to tier 2. That is key. The first thing that I'm going to do is get tier 2 on all of these positions minus kicker and punter, and that's where all of my coach XP is going to be going for the first year. You will want to prioritize certain positions first, the most bang for your buck. Think about it. Offensive line, you have 2 tackles, 2 guards, and a center. You have a ton of recruiting capability there, so you're going to influence a lot of players by getting to tier 2 here quickly. Same thing with receivers and tight ends. Receivers do transfer really effectively to both tight end and running back in this game, so you're getting a massive amount of coverage by recruiting wide receivers. So the first 2 that I would be going after every single time would be receivers and O-line. And then you can talk about some other positions that have good spread and good coverage, like defensive back, linebacker, and D-line. And then I would maybe consider talking about quarterback and running back, which are less important in terms of overall bang for your buck. Now, if you desperately need a quarterback, you might want to consider getting to tier 2 on the quarterback influence first, so that you can get that quarterback that you need and get extra influence early on into the recruiting process. What matters the most with this recruiting strategy and a lot of the other recruiting strategies out there is developing a big lead on your prospects. So it's important that you get these bonuses early on. Don't spend your coaching points elsewhere. And then the effects of this will just continue to stack the more you invest into it. Being able in tier 3 to be able to add extra hours onto recruits above 50 hours per recruit. And then in tier 4, being able to increase starting interest of players is going to skyrocket your recruiting program. And if you are being successful with your team, if you are winning, if you're gaining XP as a coach, you should be able to get all of these within 2 seasons. You should be able to get tier 2 on all of them within 1 season, and within the 2nd season you should be able to get tier 4 on all of these traits that are important, minus kicker and punter, of course. So we've set up our coach for success. Now what do we do in week 0? A lot of people are going to say different things here in week 0, and I'm not saying that other strategies are incorrect, but as you saw, I was able to come away with awesome recruits. And that was strictly because what we do here in week 0, setting ourselves up for the future. What you want to do in week 0 is fill your board with 35 targets. There are some other people out there saying, don't fill your board, this, that, and the other thing. No, we want to establish the biggest lead for prospects early on. Now, are you going to get all 35 of the prospects you put on your board early? No, in fact, most of them you're not going to get. But what you are doing is you're spreading out your early influence. You're not going to be spending points really in any direction. You are just spreading out your early influence so you have the best base to start with. You want to be able to be on the minds of as many prospects as possible at the early stages of recruiting. Then you can kind of pare it down to the ones that you want to target the next week. That way you can see and you have better chances of getting interest early and getting higher on their interest early. And so what are you going to do exactly? Well, in week 0 recruiting, all you are able to do is either scout or offer a player a scholarship. In my strategy, offer scholarships in week 0 to every single player. And as soon as any new player gets added to my board, I am offering them a scholarship. A lot of other folks out there in their videos are suggesting that you wait to offer scholarships so that you can utilize that 10% chance of getting an instant commit from that player. And that is a viable strategy. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but if you're looking for high-end volume, you need to get out to an early lead. And a lot of prospects that don't currently have you as an interest are going to jump you to the top of their list as soon as you offer them a scholarship. And that's the biggest strategy. I'll show you that when we go to week 1. A lot of people have mentioned that you want to find the players that have no offers and offer on them or put them on your board. When you put those players on your board, you want to be the first person to offer them a scholarship because that is going to jump you out to a massive early lead, and I'll show you exactly what that looks like. In week 0, though, and beyond, we're not targeting anything below a 3-star. It's simply not worth it to target anything below a 3-star. Typically, if you're a better school, you want to go 4 and 5 stars because you know if a player is going to be a bust, they'll grade out at 1 star lower. You don't want to grade out at anything lower than a 2-star on a potential bust. You can use some scouting here in week 1. You can also potentially just go through adding players and removing players and adding scholarships. You still get the chance of automatic signings week 0 here by putting those players on your board and offering them a scholarship. I've gotten 3 at a time in week 0 before. Recruits that were 3 stars just automatically popped up. They signed because I offered them the scholarship here in week 0. The thing that I want to emphasize, though, is that what you do here in week 0 does not matter a whole lot because what we're going to be focusing on in week 1 is those big time players that are out there that have not gotten a scholarship offer from another school. So in week 1, what I want to add to my list are some potential 4-star players that my pipeline might be good with, that I could potentially influence to be a good prospect for me, or prospects that fall into my 3, 4, or 5-star range that have interest in coming to my school. As an example, in week 1, I know he's a punter, but we would be looking at other positions. We would want to put a 3-star prospect that is 3rd on our board and is one of our higher end pipelines on our board and ready to go, and offer them a scholarship right off the bat, because that's going to, again, get us a good established starting point against that prospect. Now, you're going to add a bunch of these prospects to your list. Let's say that I just added all of these 4, 5-star prospects to my list. You're then going to be able to compare them and pare down from there. What I like to do a lot of times is go position by position. So let's say I want to grab a quarterback, and I'm thinking all of these guys could be potential candidates. Some of them have interests, some of them have a decent pipeline. I'm going to put all of them on my prospect list. I'm going to go to my recruiting board, and then I'm going to take a look at what the battles look like. I am going to compare my pipeline versus their pipeline. I know that for a lot of these prospects, I have a 1 or 2 pipeline. So if I'm going to compete on a prospect that has, as an example, Ross McElroy right here, a bunch of 4s and 5s above me, I'm not going to get into range to be able to get this guy if he is offered a scholarship by any of those teams that are above me. That doesn't necessarily mean I have to take him off my board and not try to get him, but in week 1, if he's not offered a scholarship by any of those teams, I'll come back and be able to add him back. For now, I'm going to remove this guy from my board. I'm going to stick with the guys like Preston Barnes, for example, that have maybe a couple of higher end pipeline teams competing for them, but a bunch of 3s, 1s, and 0s competing for them. I know that my pipeline's a 2, so if this guy doesn't get offered, I'm going to be in business to be able to actually recruit this guy and compete on him. And like I said, every of the 35 players that I put on my board here early, I am offering a scholarship to, because if I offer a scholarship and somebody else doesn't, I am going to get a massive lead on everybody else. And if it's just me and one other school, we are going to get a massive lead on all the schools that didn't offer a scholarship. It's worth it to know that those 35 scholarships go up and down based on players on your board. If you offer a guy a scholarship, then take him off your board, you get that scholarship back. It's not like you can only offer to 35 players. You can offer to however many players you want. As this cycle continues to go, you can only have 35 active scholarship offers at once. Now, these are 5 recruiting points apiece to offer a scholarship to these players. That means you're going to have a lot of points left over in week 1. Well, you can utilize those points in order to scout players. In order to maybe distinguish between all of these guys and say, I don't want to get 5 quarterbacks or bother recruiting 5 quarterbacks, I can simply scout these players and tell the differences between them. So I know that the 4-star quarterback is actually a 3-star quarterback because he's a bust, so on and so forth. And you're going to spend the rest of your points on scouting this week, and you're never going to scout again for the rest of the season. It's just not, there's no point to it. You can get awesome prospects without scouting them. Yeah, you might get some busts. Yeah, you might pick up some players that aren't as good as you thought, but you're going to be picking up so many 4, 5, and 3-star prospects that it doesn't matter. You're going to be getting so many 70-plus overall players that it doesn't matter if a few of them are busts or a few of them are gems. The other thing you're going to want to do is make sure you set up your schedule appropriately. Again, this is something that some videos have covered, but other videos have completely overlooked. I did not set up this schedule this year, but what you want to do is you want to open up as many of the games at the beginning of the season as possible and put as many of your games later. It doesn't matter where your buys are. You would prefer to have bye weeks early in a row because you're never going to get to the point, which means you have to be top 5 on a player to be able to bring them in for a visit this early in the season. So you want to give yourself as many games later on to be able to schedule a visit with a player whenever you've potentially gotten into their top 5 of their recruiting board. That's the goal. The goal is to get them on a recruiting visit as early as possible. You have to get into their top 5 influence, though, in order to be able to do so. They have to decide to go top 8, then they have to decide to go top 5, and then you can bring them in for a visit. So there's no point in having games this early. You want to schedule opportunities, more opportunities for you to bring players in later on in the season. That's going to set you up for more success. So we've gotten to week 1. What do we actually want to do with our players? Well, we want to target the appropriate players. I'm going to go out here, I'm going to get off of recommended, and I am simply going to look for the highest end players that have no offers on them that are available for me to recruit. Yes, this cornerback that's a 5-star is available for me to recruit, but he has 6 offers on him. We're never going to be able to get out to a lead on this player, and based on who he's being recruited by, a bunch of power schools, we're never going to be able to compete. So what we really want to do, and what I like to do, is go star rating by star rating. Let's see if we can find a 5-star player that's available to us that doesn't have any offers. Chances are good that this is never going to be the case. It's very rare as a 1-star school, despite what other people would lead you to believe, it is very rare for you to have access to a 5-star player that wants to potentially be recruited by you like these couple do, let alone getting one that has no offers and is available to you. So as you can see, there are a couple of players here that have no offers, which we would want to target, but our deal breakers are so low because of the school that we are that they're not going to be available to us. So we're going to switch our search and we're going to look at 4 stars. Very often you will be able to find a good number of 4 stars that have no offer on them that you can recruit. This is exactly the type of player that you want right here. And you are going to be doing this week after week after week after week, because what's going to happen is all of these players that have no interest on them from other schools, despite the fact that their top schools might be power teams, you're going to be able to jump away with an early lead on these guys because they're sleeping on them right now. They're not currently recruiting those players. So we've added all of these 4-star prospects to our board that don't currently have an offer. We want everybody that doesn't currently have an offer, all these guys down here at the bottom that are high-end prospects, and this is going to be our bread and butter week in and week out. I'm adding on as many 4- and 3-star prospects as I can that I'm going to be able to offer a scholarship and then send the house for each one of those players. You're going to want to look for, like I said, anybody that fits what you're looking to do for your team, but anybody that's a high-end prospect, 3 and 4 stars. And we can tweak this as we go. There are some strategies to tweak it, such as hard sells and soft sells, but sending the house is all you can do to start. And to be honest with you, as a small school, more often than not, the send the house function is going to be more effective than your hard sell or your soft sell. Sway, not really that good, especially if you're this type of a strategy. Yeah, you can sway players, but you're going to be wasting a certain amount of time. You might end up with less players than I'm suggesting you get. If you take a look at my school, we have a bunch of C's, D's, grades across the board. We don't grade out very well. It's not going to be to your benefit to hard sell a bunch of C and D graded potential pitches. So oftentimes, even though the hard sell pops up, you're going to want to stick with sending the house. The other thing to consider that I've already mentioned is as soon as these players are available for a visit, you want to be able to schedule that visit. Sometimes it is okay to remove the send the house, add the 40-point visit, and then add on the 10-point DM the player. And the reason for that is because you want to continue to recruit on as many players as possible. So you don't want to have to necessarily always be finagling points off of other areas so that you can put 50 on this guy and schedule him for a visit. Now, if there is any competition on these players whatsoever, yeah, you might actually want to consider putting the 50 points on and scheduling them for a visit. But you really don't necessarily have to do that. And look, this is exactly what we want on these players, and this is what you are going to ride with nonstop. So from a points perspective with Buffalo here, It looks like I can do this with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 or 8 players at a time. And that's what you're targeting. You are going to get, after a couple of weeks, enough of a lead on all of these high-end players that those top-end schools, once they do finally kick into overdrive and start trying to recruit, they will never be able to catch up to you. And so I am going to get to a point where I have 7 or 8 guys starting to commit to me in about week 4, week 5, week 6. And that's how it works. And then week 10, you're going to get another 8+ players, and it's going to continue to stack and continue to stack and continue to stack. So I'm going to go hardcore after these same players constantly. This is 1 week. I was not on the interest level for any of these players. I jumped up to 2 on this free safety, jumped up to 1 on the center, 1 on the center, third, so on and so forth. And you can allocate some small points elsewhere. If you have some 3-star players or 4-star players that were already interested in your team, you can allocate maybe 10 points a week to them, maybe 25 points a week to them, and you just want to keep a lead on those players, because if they were already interested in you, they're going to continue to build and they're going to eventually commit. So that's where some strategy comes into play. You don't have to necessarily hard sell on all the players that you have. You could hard sell on maybe 6 of them or 7 of them and split the rest of your points a little bit to balance recruiting players that are already interested in you, as long as you're providing them enough points that they stay ahead and continue to build interest with your team. And like I said, you're going to go in every single week and continue to add the players that have 0 offers out there and add them to your board. Even if you're maxed out on points, like we potentially could be right now with the players we're targeting, you want to add as many players to your board that have 0 offers as possible. You always want to keep your board maxed out. And I know I'm not doing it right now for speed purposes, but you always want to keep your board maxed out with the max number of players, because it's going to give you information on their motivations and it's going to build interest with them. If they are on your board, it will continue to progress. And so even if there are a bunch of other 4-star players out there with 0 offers on them, I want to bring them in. I want to offer them a scholarship, and I just want to get on their minds. I want 35 targets on my board, even though currently I'm focusing on these players. Now, as you can see, after 2 weeks of doing this, these players are just nowhere close on any of the other teams, and I'm going to be able to run away with it. And none of those top-end schools have even bothered to offer these players. This is how you get away with getting top-end players, because these guys will never be able to catch up to you. And these types of players will be available to you throughout the season, week in and week out, and you want to be able to recruit as many of them as possible. Like I said, get as many of these 0 offer players in and offer them a contract. If you have to pull 5 points off of a guy to put it on another guy that has 0 offers, do it, because it's going to jump you to the top of the list and it's going to start accruing interest because you have an offer on this guy and nobody else does. If I removed my 50 points off of this guy, I would continue to build points towards him because he has a scholarship offer from my school, and those other schools will not be accruing points because they have not offered him a scholarship. And then a lot of people have placed emphasis, like I said, on the soft sell, the hard sell, the sway, and various different things. I'm telling you, it's not as important as people make it out to be. If you can get a soft sell or a hard sell that lines up with a lot of green motivation traits, then yes, it is worthwhile. For example, with Dion Johnson here, if I was able to get to a point where I could offer him a hard sell that included the A+ playing time, the B- proximity to home, and the B academic prestige, then yeah, I would hard sell him on that. But if his motivation is a C-, a D, and a B, it's not worth it to hard sell that player. Just keep sending the house on that guy and you will get them. And by the time you have hit the end of the season, and we're talking about, 14, 15 weeks or something like that, you will have gone through this process 3 times over. So you will have gotten, these handful of really good prospects that you went hardcore on, let's say 5, 6, maybe 7 prospects, and then you will have been continually building up some other prospects that were a little bit less important to you, maybe some 3 stars, or maybe there were a couple of 4 stars over here that you've offered a scholarship to, and you've just been building up 5 points per week on those players, and then you just kick those guys into overdrive once these guys commit, and then you add a new round of players to your board. You will have added probably 20, 25 players to your board by the end of the season. How do you then get from 24, 25 players up to a full 34, 35 class if you really want to? Well, you do that through the final off-season recruiting, and you do that through the transfer portal. This same stuff literally applies to the off-season recruiting in the transfer portal. You'll get to the off-season, and there are going to be a bunch of 3-star and 4-star prospects that still have 0 offers. Go offer every single one of them and put as many points on them as possible. And if you want to add some transfer portal players, add those transfer portal players at that time and go hardcore on them. By that time, you should be able to be investing in your coach abilities if you're winning games that allow you to do more with your recruitment. If you get to the end of the season and you have been successful, you will likely be adding tier 3s to some of these recruiting capabilities. And what does tier 3 do? It allows you to increase weekly recruiting hours for that position. So that's where you want to think about your transfer portal players and some of those players that you might be picking up that had 0 offers towards the end of the season. You can now start to offer 60 or 65 points to some of those players on a weekly basis. And guess what? That is absolutely huge in securing those transfer portal players and those players at the end of the season. You will also get 4 weeks where you can visit players during the offseason. Again, not a lot of people seem to mention this in their videos. If you're done with your visits in season, you get another round of visits during the offseason. You get 4 weeks. You want to schedule as many of those players for a visit during week 1 and week 2 of the offseason as possible. As soon as you can give a player a visit, give a player a visit and make sure that their visit priority lines up with one of their recruitment motivations. So every time you give a player a visit, you're going to have to pick from one of their motivation categories over here on the right side to see what you're going to pitch them on whenever they visit. If you don't have enough information, typically things like proximity to home, if it's good for a player, things like playing style, things like coach prestige are usually a solid way to go. Something I really didn't mention so far is when you do go to hard sell a player, if you don't necessarily have all the information you need, you will still be able to guess it. And this has been hit on in just about everybody's video that has made a video on this subject. If you go to hard sell and I only know one of these traits for this player, I know which ones it can't be, right? There are only so many options here. So if I selected, I know that he likes pro potential. He doesn't, there's X's on the 2 others, so I know it's not that. There's X's on that one, so I know it's not that one. Most of the time in these scenarios, you're going to be able to find out the exact one by process of elimination, just scrolling through and seeing what he has X's on and what he doesn't have X's on. Again, people make a huge deal about this process, but most people are coming in playing as a school that's not going to have good grades. So hard selling a player is not necessarily going to be beneficial to you anyway. If I tried to hard sell this player, even if this was his perfect pitch, football influencer, if I tried to hard sell him on a D-, a D, and a D-, that's not really going to do anything for me. So I'm not going to waste my time hard selling this player. I'm going to make sure he gets a visit, and I'm going to bring him in with send the house. And these players are inevitably going to commit to my team. This is the only place that it really differs with some of the strategies I've seen out there. They're holding on to their scholarships until now. The only problem with that is you delay your ability to build up an influence lead over other schools. You guys can see that my influence lead over all of these players is astronomical. Nobody is going to be competing with these players. But if I hold off on my scholarship, the gap is going to be smaller. And when I offer that scholarship, the other teams might trigger to offer a scholarship. And also, when I offer that scholarship, yeah, I might get a 10% chance of one of these guys auto signing, but I'm going to be in a potentially worse competitive situation with that player against the other teams who are trying to potentially come back and get that player. So you want to build the early lead on them and get as many of these guys as possible. And guys, I'm not kidding you. This is how I got 34 prospects and almost got a full recruiting class of high-end 3 and 4-star players. Again, I didn't have access to a 5-star player. It's going to be total RNG whether you have access to potentially recruit a no offer 5-star player or not, or whether maybe a 5-star player has some amount of interest in your team. Chances are good that that's just not going to happen. And for a while, you're going to have to deal with 3 and 4-star players. And I say deal with, these are all starters on my team almost right away. And as you can see, I almost got this 35th prospect. Trust me, guys, this is all you need to do. Just to summarize it for you, in week 0, make sure you're offering scholarships to your 3, 4, and 5-star players. Make sure you're utilizing a little bit of scouting. That way you can maybe dial in on a couple of prospects that you really want to hammer away at. But the important aspects of recruiting this year are get to week 1 and so on. And every week, add the 0 offer players, the best, the highest star players. 0 offer players to your board and build a lead on those players before anybody else can offer them a scholarship. And you can choose to do it either way. You can do it the way that I do it by offering them a scholarship up front to try to boost how quickly you build that early lead, or you can hang on to your scholarship and offer it to them later so that you hopefully have a 10% chance of getting them to auto sign to your team. I know that when I build an early enough lead and I build a big enough lead that the players are coming to my team. I know that nobody else is going to be able to compete with that lead that I have. So that's why I offer the scholarship early, because it's effectively the same step for me. It's just less of a chance because I get out to such a big lead that it's not even worth it for other teams to try to compete on recruiting that player. And I just get these players basically by default because of how much time I've committed into them. So this is what I recommend for you guys. Also, remember that in the off season, you get 4 additional weeks to bring players in for visits. You should be trying to get all of them done by week 1 and week 2. And you can add on, and the transfer portal players do not have to be no offer players. By that point, like I said, you should hopefully have enough XP on your coach that you're able to get some of those influence increases where instead of spending 50 points on a player, you can spend 65. And that is crucial for those transfer portal players. That is going to allow you to have success in bringing them in and getting more points, more influence on them than the other teams out there that are offering them to transfer. If you guys found this video useful or informative, leave a like down below, comment, and subscribe. Let me know your guys' strategy for recruiting. What's the best recruiting class you guys have gotten? The only reason that this recruiting class isn't ranked higher than number 20 is because I didn't have access to any 1-star players. And guarantee you, if you have access to 1-star players, you will be able to recruit these guys. And you know, I know that some other people have shown low-end schools being able to get, you know, into the top 15, top 5, top 10 in recruiting classes. That is predominantly based on you having access to players that you can even recruit in the first place. We only at Buffalo had access to so many 4-star prospects that we could even try to recruit. That's the big difference. So it's a lot of randomness. If anybody tells you they can guarantee you a top 15, a top 10, a top 5 class with a low-end school, they are full of it. What I can guarantee you is probably about a top 25 or a top 20 recruiting class, because chances are good you're going to have access to 10 plus 4-star recruits. You might not get every single one of them, but you're going to have access to that many. And you're certainly going to have access to 25 plus 3-star recruits. So you're going to be at a very minimum around this category. And if you're recruiting the same as Tennessee, Wisconsin, Notre Dame, Washington, Florida, you're doing really well for a 1-star school, and you're setting yourself up for long-term success. And then your XP and your recruits and everything and your training builds and builds and builds, and that's how you make yourself a powerhouse. I didn't take Buffalo from a 73 overall team to an 86 overall team in 2 seasons by not knowing what I'm able to do with recruiting. Trust me, this is an excellent strategy. Go try it out for yourselves. Come back and leave me a comment and tell me how you did. I'm really curious to hear about it. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video. Like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, have a good one.